So there we are. It's going to be on this sort of position, but bolted up with the gasket sealant later. But we're going to need a water lock after this to stop the salt air corroding. Some people don't do this, and the engine will be twice as noisy and much more susceptible to flooding the main bearings and pistons if this exhaust hose gets wet. So the two options, basically, Vire did a side saddle stainless exhaust for the 7 model only, and as you can see, it comes out, it's an up and over, and there's a water lock in here. This runs very quiet. The only problem with it is you may need a bit more space on the port side, and with the dyno start here, it's quite difficult to get the oil stick out and check the oil, and it also is very difficult to access the pump. So you probably want to take the whole exhaust system off, which is just 4 bolts and a clip if you're doing the pump. The other thing, for the Morse controls, because these early model, and by the way, this has been brought in for spares, but the early models didn't have the cast-in lugs. When people demanded some secure way of fitting onto the engine, Vire came up later with this flat sheet panel, which is fixed to one of the exhaust silencer bolts and the 2 studs. The only problem with this is it required an extra gasket and this, which increased to about 4mm the length of the studs that you need, and on some engines the studs weren't long enough to accommodate it, or the exposed bit of the stud had got rotted, and so you couldn't securely bring all of these parts together unless you had long studs with about 30mm of thread on them. So there was another variation that Vire did, and that is this cylindrical exhaust, which is a lot neater, and the water in both cases gets injected into the top here. I've just put this together loose to show you. Now that did allow you to get to the oil filler, which was nice, and although it's physically smaller, it worked exactly the same, so you got about half as much noise out the engine with this, and of course it can't rust or corrode. Now in terms of the Morse, this was the other idea that Vire did as a part. I call it an exhaust hanger, Morse exhaust hanger, because it hangs off those 2 studs. Again, it doesn't need an extra gasket, but it's with a lock washer, it's going to add about another 3mm onto studs that you'd need good threads on. And this was for the gear. You'd have a couple of saddles here to hold the gear cable, the gear stick, and there's another saddle which comes with this I haven't put on at the moment, and you'd splice that to the throttle. So there was nothing for choke operation here, but the weakness of this system was if your gear stick got stiff, then what happened was you put a lot of power on your stick up in the cockpit, and it would put a bending motion, because this is higher than this, and it would start to work loose these studs or even break. So it wasn't as stable as the side plate here was. So this is quite stable, but it needed the extra thickness. Now there is one other way of doing this. Instead of having the later exhaust, which is very rare and expensive in good condition like this, or the early exhaust with those adaptions, is to go over to the stainless steel exhaust. And the reason I say that is because it includes the neatest ever set of mountings, more accurate than the previous models as well. They will never rust or corrode. These are stainless steel, comes with the bolts as well, and it's easy to fit. The other advantage of this exhaust is it's more efficient on cooling. I'll explain why. On the Vire 7, if I just take this exhaust off for a second, I'll show you. Now the water is pumped in from your seacock here, it comes out here under pressure, and it goes straight into the jacket. There's an entry point here. Okay, so it goes into that, and that is just the jacket. It exits here out of the jacket and pressure, and this is aluminium. This is perfect, but they do have a tendency to corrode because of dissimilar metals, and the air bubbles collect up here, which corrodes quite frequently. Now, it passes through this tube, and originally they have a leaky piece of hose which is quite thin walled and a clip to squeeze it, but I upgrade these to this magnificent double thickness piece of rubber that you squeeze together with the two halves. But look at this. This is an original design bodge. I always wondered why it injects the water downwards, and then I realised because the outlet on the late engines is here, and it's effectively here but carried through an internal pipe to a banjo down there on early models, what it would do is it would only circulate the water on the top half of the cylinder, and the bottom half would stay hot water potentially and seize the engine. So what they're trying to do is inject the water downwards, hoping that it will cover all of the piston's cylinder wall evenly, which it doesn't, and the power is limited to 7 horsepower. Well, I thought about this and I noticed on the Vire 12 exhaust they do it differently. On the Vire 12 exhaust they inject the water straight into the cylinder via these couplings. So you have a hose which comes over, injects into the side of the exhaust, and it goes through this tube which blocks because it's aluminium, unfortunately, goes through a wiggly gasket, and because it's injected near the bottom right hand side, when it comes out, which is here, it has actually diagonally gone across the engine and cooled it more efficiently. It then gets into the water trap design and is injected into the exhaust, so it's cooled as well. It's a very quiet unit. It's a great idea to have the water injected bottom on the port side and ejected top on starboard. So I thought, why not do this for the Vire 7? And that's what I've done. So when you get this stainless exhaust kit, you get a changeover inlet. So all you do is you tap out this core plug and you tap this one in instead, and you block your old inlet outlet port here, which could be one of these two positions, and that way the water via a simple hose is injected into the port hand side left, and it exits just like the Vire 12, efficiently cooling all of the cylinder in this path out the top. It goes into this fitting and via some simple washers and it injects it exactly like the Vire 12 does. So you get the beauty of a water trap built into the engine, you get more efficient cooling, and you do away with this unreliable fitting with the corroding top joint in the aluminium, the trapped air bubbles, and the funny bent pipe to try and get the water down below. So this will work reliably for maybe 10-20 years until these things start to corrode up, but this should work forever, and it just makes more sense. Now when this late model or early model exhaust are fitted, either you want to have one of these Vire water traps in stainless steel, or I haven't got one down at the moment, but Vitus do these brown boxes which are sort of this kind of convoluted thing, but they are water traps. Look for LP40 and that's the right model to get. I have a few of those in my shop. Sometimes they're not on display, so just message me. But the beauty of those is that you can bend the exhaust pipe around for a foot or two either side and put them where you want in the bilge, instead of having a bulkier fixed silencer. So those are your options, and as you can see, having a built-in water lock, built-in non-corrodable Morse fittings, and a much more secure outlet, you're going to have reliability and upgrade the cooling with this stainless exhaust. But I'll carry on now, and I'll just do a separate video of how I fit this.